Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Linda Waite, Senior Director of Talent Acquisition, Inclusion and Diversity, and Employer Branding at Electronic Arts. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Chris. I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, super excited to have you on, and there's no one else I can talk about ice hockey with, so that was always fun. I'm so super excited to start. Let's start there.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's start there. No, before we go any further, tell everyone a little bit more yourself personally, your background, and sort of your journey to where we are now at EA.
Yeah, so I've been at EA since 2018, so it's been a little over 2 years now. And my role there is in talent acquisition, helping to just advance a lot of the work that we do around inclusion and diversity and employer brand. And I think the two things that have come together in my career over time, I started my career in the advertising industry back in Chicago. Worked at multiple different ad agencies. Inclusion and diversity is a problem in that industry, and it's been one for a while. And so I started early on doing work around I&D. And so I've been kind of on this journey for a really, really long time. And EA is the first opportunity to really take all of that experience and actually really have the role where I get to apply it. And it was intentional in my career because it's important to me. I want to spend this part of I've been in recruiting for almost 20 years now. And I want to spend the rest of my career focusing on this particular aspect. And then the employer brand, of course, kind of comes right out of the advertising. So when I was in advertising, I was working in branding and advertising and marketing. I would work on pitch teams. I actually worked on, strategies. So I actually have experience in the advertising industry, not just in HR. This job is sort of the culmination of all of that experience. And it's sort of a job that's a bit made up, to align with my strengths, which is actually a really cool thing that we were able to do at EA, which you don't get to do at a lot of companies. Kind of make up your own job.
When you first were brought in, is the I&D and employer brand was something that was added on? Like when you first joined?
Added on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is new responsibilities actually in the last year. So when I first came on, I was brought on to run talent acquisition for the marketing organization and then for our growth organization. And so marketing's pretty clear. Everybody knows what that means. The growth organization was actually something that Andrew Wilson put together in 2018, reorged the company. And this is when Laura Miele went in to run studios for us. And this is when we took publishing and put it under marketing. And then strategic growth is basically competitive gaming, our APAC region, and subscription platforms. So there are the three areas of the company where they felt like there was a lot of growth opportunity for us. And so there's very unique recruiting needs there behind all of that stuff, especially when you think about things like esports. So I came in to do those. That was my job, the recruiting, the running of the recs, the strategic thinking. And over the course of the first year, the company was on this really interesting journey around I&D. And I was fortunate enough to have some sneak peeks into it. And based on my background in advertising and my passion for this topic, I was like, I felt like I was kind of like on the outside looking in a little bit. And so my manager and I started having conversations about that. Like, look, I really want to do this. And if I don't get to do it here, I might try to go do it somewhere else.
And I love that, by the way, for a second, just stop you there. Cause I heard you say that in a recent interview and I was like, wow, like you were so passionate. You were like, look, if I don't get to do this here, I'm probably going to leave and do it somewhere else. And I was like,
that's exactly the conversation we had. And so not only was there, because at some point in my career, I do expect to be a head of TA somewhere, whether it's EA or somewhere else. And so, I believe in having those really transparent conversations with your manager. That's just how I operate. And so we had that talk. We know that like my journey will hopefully be at EA for a long time, but as long as I'm doing this kind of work. And so he and Mala, our chief people officer, talked about it, came back to me with a proposal. Here you go. We'd like you to run these things. So that was at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Well, for my last interview with Marla, I'm not surprised. She's incredible.
She really is. And she's really transformed the way that EA approaches all of its people practices, everything that has to do with how we support our people. Mala has been innovative, has engineered new ways of looking at it, new structures, new thinking. It's been quite the journey and not an easy one. But we're finally seeing the fruits of all of that in a super aligned people practices function that supports our employees across every aspect of their journey with us.
Cool. I do want to stop off for a second that how an ice hockey player ended up doing what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Well, the hockey is actually a new thing for me, at least in playing. I've always been a fan. I grew up in Chicago, Chicago Blackhawk. Patrick Kane probably entering the draft and getting pulled by the Blackhawks was probably the point where I flipped into kind of like fanatic sort of a thing. My brother played, I skated, I figure skated as a girl. But, when I was growing up in Chicago, like we had a pond nearby we'd go skate on, but it was like, I don't even think about what skates I got handed and I put on, but I put on the white ones. I was given the white ones as a girl.
Oh,
that was what
that's a good point.
Yeah. So I wore the white skates for a while and I figure skated. And then I just walked away from it for many, many years. And I honestly, it was a year and a half ago, I was driving by an ice rink and I was at a really, really big transitional point in my life. There was so much going on and I just I needed something. I needed a hobby. And I love hockey. I watch hockey incessantly. When the playoffs are on, I watch every game, not just my own team's game. I am a fan of the sport.
Like Shane, my co-founder.
Yeah. It's not like I'm just not, a one team person. So, I drove by this rink and I was like, oh, I used to skate. I love to skate. Maybe I should skate. One thing led to another. And, I've been playing now competitively for a year and busting my butt and clinics and camps. And just I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm an athlete in training. I think about what I'm eating before games, and I really care about my performance. I track my stats, so it's just been a really fun thing to do. And it's been, I think there's that one of those motivational phrases that's been going around on Instagram and stuff is be brave enough to suck at something new. I'm like, well, I'm definitely doing that. I absolutely
I've been fully in that.
New.
Really random question, but is anything you've taken away from hockey that's impacted the work that you do at EA?
There absolutely. So one of the things about hockey is it's a game of flow. I think that's a really interesting concept to bring into, especially in a world where you're working virtually in a pandemic. It breaks down some of the old kind of legacy ways that we work. So a lot of times, for example, when I run projects now in this role that I have, both for employer brand and for IND, there's a lot of project work. There's a lot less. I spend a lot less time thinking about how recs are getting filled. And I spend a lot more time thinking about kind of the bigger picture strategic stuff that we're doing and how we design that whole process to be really inclusive. I'm working for myself in my own development on less command and control management and more agile management. And so when it comes to sort of this agile way of working, where it's I'm going to give it's basically to fully do the analogy. I'm going to give other people the puck. I'm going to hang back at the blue line. I'm going to see what they do. I'll catch the puck at the blue line if they need it back, and I'll get it back into them. But the team is out, and when we're flowing and we're figuring out where to cover and who to pass to and how to make sure that we're accomplishing what we need to accomplish, was to get the puck in the net. So it definitely, in that aspect, it's been, a pretty tight analogy. And then of course there's the Wayne Gretzky quote that everyone's used for years, which is skate where the puck is going, sort of anticipation, It's definitely something that team aspect, playing team sports, I think.
Yeah.
And then applying some of those principles to work is interesting. We were having this conversation yesterday about Netflix, because that was one of their kind of founding, when they first started and they put out kind of their culture manifesto, one of the things in there was, we treat this like we're a professional sports team, and you come in and you perform and you partner and you work together. Just an interesting concept to think about.
Yeah. Well, I attribute most of our success to that. Myself and Shane grew up playing competitive sports in every aspect, not just ice hockey, basketball, anything you can think of. We were obsessed. That's what we did. And we were next door neighbors and we just competed against each other in everything. And similar when we came into business, we were used to falling off on our face, literally. And we understood that it was this process of you're going to be terrible at something, like everyone, but that's normal. And then there's this process. And we also, we're used to having coaches. So that was quite great when we went to businesses. Okay, that's my coach, my manager. But we, in our minds, that's my coach. And I need to learn and progress. And we realized that I can either try and do all on my own, which is almost impossible, or I can collaborate with my teammates and we can get there together. So we kind of, we felt quite at home actually when we came into the business environment.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about it that way because, I think you said one thing that I think is really interesting sometimes that, I think people forget is your job is to progress. You're not your job is to get better. We're like drafting you because we think you have the skills and potential, and then we're going to develop you, and you have to put in that effort too. I talk to people all the time about, your career is your responsibility. I am here to coach you, guide you, consult, help, support, give you ideas, but your career is in your hands. Versus sort of this mentality where it's like, what is my company's not providing me development opportunities. My company's not helping me grow that's on you. Have you brought any development opportunities? Have you come to your manager and said, this is what I need? It's definitely something that we drive and instill in our teams, at least in TA, that they own their career path and their performance, and is expected that they're going to fail sometimes and fall on flat. And it's expected that they're going to improve and that they're going to care about improving.
One of the things that really frustrated me, because I never went to school, so I never had the experience of coming into the workplace, having gone through college or university. I just went, as soon as I could legally work, I got a job. And one thing I saw people really struggle with is that there was this sort of this entitlement that now I've done college and university, that when I turn up to the workplace, the learning's done. Like, I've already done it. I went to uni, got my degree, and I walk in the door, and all of a sudden they expect that the work's already been done. And all of a sudden there's this moment where they're like, oh, wow, it's just starting. The work's just starting now. And they really struggle. And I saw a lot of friends of mine who, when I saw entering the workplace, 4 years behind me, because I never went to school, really get that shock. And I was like, no, it's never ending. It's just like, that's why it's so exciting, because you're always developing and growing along the way.
Well, and that the other thing that happens when you kind of come in out of university right into school, and you sort of, if you have that mentality when you come in, is it manifests itself for some people who don't end up realizing that, oh, I'm meant to work now and grow and change and learn more. It manifests itself in sort of this, well, I've been in this job for a year, so when's my promotion? It sort of starts to make you think like it's just about the number of years that you do something. And I think that's a really interesting concept, because we often equate years of experience with expertise, especially when we're recruiting, So I see this all the time. I need somebody with 8 to 10 years experience. Well, somebody who has 10 years of experience as a manager could be a terrible, terrible manager.
For 10 years. Terrible manager for 10 years.
Just really bad at it. And you now think that because they have 10,
so
and
true.
they'll use it as a razor to like pass on someone too. Like, this person only has 6 years of management. They can't possibly be good enough. I'm like, they could have been a brilliant manager for 6 years versus a shitty manager for 10 years. Which one do you want?
I was interviewing some very senior sales executives to be account managers at our business over the past few months. And I saw that in some of them. I saw, on the CV 5-6 years, and I'll speak to them and I'll be like, oh, terrible sales practices. And I'm like, and then I've got this person with maybe 1 year's experience, but it's very high quality, super, super focused, and just has this growth mindset. And I was like, wow, I want that person right there. Or even sometimes someone with zero experience, which is kind of me. I had no, I remember going to my interview, they were like, you need 3 years sales experience and a degree. And I remember saying at the time, as a 17-year-old, why do I need that to sell? And I remember the recruiter couldn't answer the question. And I was like, and I wasn't being cheeky. I was like, why does having this degree in something that's nothing to do with sales, by the way, mean that I should be a good salesperson? They just had no answer for me. And they ended up hiring me, even though I didn't fit this 3-year sales experience or this kind of thing, but it was just crazy. It didn't make no sense. Similar with Shane. I hired him out of college. He's a couple years, my co-founder Shane, I didn't tell my HR director, which I got in trouble for, because I knew that they would say, does he have 3 years experience or does he have a degree? I was like, it's just so stupid. And I hired him in the summer holidays without telling anyone. And he did his first few sales, and they were like, oh, you can stay. It's
fascinating. It's fascinating. That right there is really interesting, because I had this experience multiple times in my career, and I think it influenced a lot about how I try to coach and lead managers today and how to think about talent. Because in the advertising world, you freelance people a lot. So you have people coming in, an art director, copywriter, come in to work on a pitch for a client. And then they go, they're like journeymen, right? They do that job for this agency. They go to some other agency, they do that job. And, the stakes on hiring those freelancers aren't always as high to some people as hiring somebody full-time. So when it came to hiring full-time people, you could present a portfolio to a manager and they would pass on that portfolio. Then you'd bring that person in as a freelancer because they're okay with them as a freelancer. They weren't okay with them as a full-time hire, but as a freelancer, it's fine. Person would come in and do brilliant work and then they want to hire them. I'm like, this is somebody you passed on. You passed on their portfolio. Yeah. In fact, it got to the point where I would joke around with some of them and I would tell them, I think you're so, like, you have such a snobbery about how you look at portfolios. I think you'd pass on your own right now if I presented it to you.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think they honestly, so there's something really interesting about that because there's a ton of bias that goes into how much education someone has, yes, what company they worked at before, what, like, if you're in advertising or a creative field, what type of creativity, what brand did you work on? I mean, when I was at Apple, like, it was crazy because they had such an attitude about like who works there. And it's like, you would suggest someone that worked on packaged goods brands and they would be like, oh God, no, we can only hire people that worked at Nike, you know? Now they've broken out of that. And I was there when we started to talk about that. But when I first got there in 2013, there was a lot of pedigree bias. You know, we only hire from this particular agency and we only hire people who worked at Nike and, you
That's
know.
the opposite of what you want, really, because otherwise you're just kind of getting the same voices in the same mindsets. You don't have that the opposite of diversity that you're bringing in there.
Right. Well, and a lot of people think that, you know, there's some secret sauce, right? You know, I've had this conversation back in Chicago with one of my senior leaders, and he was like, yeah, but there's a secret sauce here. Like, this is what works. It's our culture. And it was basically, he was hiring like himself.
Yeah.
And that's what he thought because he clicked with everyone. It was like the beer test, right? Can I have a beer with these people? Can I hang out with them? Are they cool? You know? And this was very much how hiring happened. And that kind of stuff is happening. Even in companies that are, you know, saying, hey, we're committed to inclusion and diversity. And, you know, we saw this in the US and in many other countries this year in particular. Companies coming out and making these sweeping statements about like who they were going to, like how they were going to change their demographics and how they were going to hire more underrepresented talent. And then when you peel all of that back and try to go like, yeah, but how? How are you really going to do that? And being a person who's been on the front lines of the how for a while, it is extraordinarily difficult because it does require so many levels of looking in the mirror. I mean, we have to do this as recruiters. I was having a couple conversations this week on a few projects that I'm working on for EA. And I said this repeatedly to our teams. I said, you know what, we were talking about how long it takes somebody to look at a resume. And if you just stop for a moment and think about the last time you picked up a resume or looked at one online, since we don't print them out as much anymore, but the last time you looked at a resume, what are you looking at as a human being? Take a moment and think about, what do I look at right now? Okay, I look at the name, then I look at where are they? Then I look at where they're working, then I look at where they worked before, then I count up the number of years of experience they have. That's my mental process. I had to stop and think about it.
Old school things.
And I'm like, oh, those are all the wrong things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Those are all the wrong things to look at, right? And by the way, if I have a stack of 25 of them to do, I'm doing that in 10 seconds, 15 seconds.
So, yeah.
And then I'm making a decision about this human being. Are they in the out pile or the in pile? And as a recruiter, you have an extraordinary amount of power here. You are the person that decides whether that human being even gets seen by a hiring manager. And we're human beings too, all of us in recruiting. So it's interesting. A lot of times this conversation happens where it's like, oh, we've got to train hiring managers to do a better job being inclusive. Those bad managers are not being inclusive enough. We are humans too, and we are the front line, and we hold an extraordinary amount of power. And if we don't take a look at that, you know, that's kind of the first step in all of this. So and then you're asking managers to do the same, and you're asking interviewers to do the same, to like really try to unlearn kind of what I just described about my own process when I was looking at resumes. I had to like go, wow, that's not okay, Linda. You really have to do this differently. You really have to turn this on its head.
How are you doing that? How are you removing bias from your hiring process?
Yeah, I think first of all, the way we talk about it is reducing bias, because Bias is so ingrained in who we are and how our brains work. I don't know that I'll ever achieve. It's an unachievable goal to say I'm going to eliminate it.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So the first step in all of this is really to educate people on bias itself. What is it? It's okay. By the way, it's not a judgment. You don't want to put people on the defensive in this conversation. So we all have it. It's human nature. The most important thing for you to figure out as an individual is what are yours and how do they affect your decisions, first and foremost. We train then on all the different biases, pedigree bias. So we have hiring training. This is one of my responsibilities at EA, is that I oversee the training, the content, the rollout. We've trained probably about 1,000 managers in the last 2 years across all of EA globally in pretty much every country. We still have a lot more to go. And we want to get to all of our interviewers too, so that we get to a point where if you haven't gone through the training, you don't interview. You have to be kind of certified to interview. That's where we're going. We're not quite there yet, but that's the journey we're on. So that training really starts by understanding bias, then understanding all the different kinds of biases that can come into play in the recruiting process. And so we were talking about some of them. Pedigree bias around what company you've worked for in the past is a big one. Years of experience, there's a bias around, number of years of experience and how that might, how people think that's expertise. There's biases around your education. What school did you go to? You were talking about your own experience where you didn't graduate university. There's a lot of jobs that actually don't require a university degree, but we still somehow think this is important.
Like sales.
Right. And I can't see, like, you don't need a degree to be a recruiter, for God's sakes. Like, I don't need a college degree. Like, my degree is in acting. I don't know. I don't know if it comes into play,
but sense.
So we look at, and there's so many more that come into play. There's these biases around, who we think a caregiver is in a family. So if we find out that someone has small children, somewhere in our brains, something's connecting and saying, well, I don't think that person's going to be able to travel as much. So now we've got a bias around caregiving that's actually affecting a decision that we make about a hire. So the more that we can sort of shine lights on all those things, make people comfortable talking about them, help people understand how to figure out their own. So the way that I do this is usually just, that thing that we all do, and we're, I got a good gut feeling about this person, or I don't have a good gut feeling. We have our gut feelings. 9 times out of 10, we're using those, right, to make decisions about candidates. What we try to train people to do is to stop right there. As soon as you have the feeling, you got to stop yourself from making a decision in that moment. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why do I feel this way? Why am I about to pass on this person because I'm having this weird, like, spidey sense or gut feeling? What is it? What am I doing? Is one of my biases coming into play? Or do I actually have evidence that they can or cannot do the job based on me defining the scope of the job really well? So it's all of it, like that scoping the job, understanding your biases, sticking to the job scope, evaluating candidates on a consistent basis against your job scope. All of those things come into play in the training.
Mm-hmm. Who leads it? Like, what does it look from a practical sense? How long is it? What's the format? Who leads it?
Yeah. We're actually in the process of redefining it now. So it was originally conceived to be a day of training in a room with a trainer. So we had and it was actually developed prior to me getting to EA. So it was in a pilot stage when I got to EA. It was an outside consultant that they brought in to do the training. My experience at Apple was that I did similar training. So I'd actually already had experience designing training like this. And we were so close to launching it, and we didn't get it launched before I left, but got to EA, this was already developed. So that's the 8-hour course was what it was initially planned out to be. Now, even in 2018, my skepticism was like, no one's going to sit through 8 hours.
That was my initial reaction when I said 8 hours, by the way.
Yeah, I know. That was my initial reaction. Was like, I don't even want to sit in this training for 8 hours. And I'm in recruiting. So I immediately, when I started doing it, and remember, my initial job was just that marketing group and that growth group. So my job as a recruiting leader was to take the training and train my groups. And my other peers had the job of taking the training and training their groups. And that's how it started. Now, through that, like, I was so passionate about this. I started changing things. I started to reorder stuff when I was doing it to my teams. I took stuff out. I changed the timing because I knew that human nature was as soon as they saw 8 hours, they were going to check out before they even walked in the door.
Yeah.
And I started to add a lot of stories, personal stories, funny stories, stories to relate to, stories of vulnerability in myself, kind of like using myself as the example of what not to do to make everybody feel comfortable. Now we're at a point where we are completely reconceiving it. Partly because of the pandemic and trying to deliver it via Zoom. We'd broken it down into like 2 2-hour sessions, I think is where it's landed now. Now we're actually looking at is like, how can we do some self-directed learning? So you don't actually have to sit. So there's some things I can teach you maybe through like a TED Talk like environment where I do a video that helps you understand how to scope out your job properly. Or, we do some modules that are in person around how to build great interview questions that get to deep insights about the work that somebody's going to need to do rather than more generic questions that people just, Google off the internet, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at how we reconceive that training. We're also looking at building out modules we didn't have before because there's gaps. We talked about how to look at a resume. I've never seen any training anywhere about how to look at a resume. And so we're going to build that. I've never seen it anywhere.
I've never had that training before.
I've never had it.
Yeah.
So I think it's
so
really
important. How crazy is that, by the way? Like, just for a second,
right?
Like, that people are making millions of decisions of people's lives. No one's ever had training. I've never had training on that.
No one. This is the thing that kills me. And I think if you've read some of the things that I've written and you've seen some of the other stuff that I've put out there in the world and in terms of presentations and other podcasts, it's like, if you do nothing else, get your people some training. How is it that we just assume that people can do this because they're managers? This is really hard stuff.
Yeah.
So suddenly you get promoted, you become a manager, like you need to go hire people. You're like, okay, what do I do? They figure it out, they wing it. And then from winging it and getting some hits here and there, they start to think they know what they're doing. And they're building all these bad habits throughout their career. It doesn't matter how many people you've interviewed. That doesn't make you good at it. It doesn't matter if you sort of got it right 70% of the time by using your gut, you're still doing it wrong, and you're probably leaving great talent on the table.
I want to jump onto the article that I read recently. And the title already got me intrigued. Managers, stop outsourcing diversity. Owning it is the only way. Tell us about why you wrote that article, and then we'll jump into it a bit more.
Every company has a diversity inclusion team these days. Most have a chief diversity officer, some version of I&D, DEI, something like that. Most big companies have, like EA, like other companies that were our neighbors here in Silicon Valley, have ERGs. So your employee resource groups. There's like Black African American employees, Latinx employees, women, et cetera, et cetera. As you build these resources, and then you have your talent acquisition team, we all have diversity in our portfolio, like in our remit, our expectations, our portfolio of responsibilities. So these teams get sprung up, and it allows managers to go, hey, recruiting, I need you to get me some more diverse candidates. And then they go back to their day job. And then they go, oh, you know what? I want to get some diverse referrals because diversity is really important to me. Hey, people that I know that are in ERGs, can you guys help me refer some people to my job? Okay, now, hey, diversity and inclusion team, what events should we be going to so that you guys can help me fill the role that I have open? It's sort of, and that's the outsourcing, right? It's everybody else, like all of these other teams, come do it for me. Instead of, guess what? Who makes every single decision in the hiring process? Manager. They tell the recruiter what to go find. They make decisions about who they're going to talk to once they look at their resumes. They make the decision about who is going to be on their interview panel. They decide whether they're going to brief their interview panel or not, by the way. They decide what they're going to tell their interview panel and how they're going to conduct that whole thing. They then decide who they're going to hire, and they decide they're usually in charge of the compensation as well. They make every single decision. And a lot of them are outsourcing it and expecting all of these other teams to do that work for them. Now, we're here to consult, support. We have an expertise. There's absolutely no doubt recruiting plays a huge role in this. But our role is really to educate those managers along the way. I tell our recruiters all the time, your job is to make them better than when you found them. When they came to you as a manager, your job is that they're a better manager, hiring manager after they go through this process with you. So whether they've gone through the training or not, that is our job in TA, is to educate them so that they can make better decisions about how they write their job descriptions, better decisions about how they scope out their jobs. Job descriptions are, by the way, super hard to write. Again, no one teaches you how to do it. Most managers just pull one they used the last time, make a couple changes and slap it up on the career page. We have to think about these things. All of those things in the way we start, managers have to look at and take responsibility and ownership of. So you can put as many goals out as you want as a company. You can say we're going to hire X number of X by X. But if you're not telling your managers this is actually your job and holding them accountable as a part of their day job, getting them the tools they need to do it and training them on it, you won't reach those goals. You won't hit those numbers.
Yeah. Because you are right though, in the article, so many managers say they're, super, I'm committed to our D&I goals, et cetera, et cetera. We hear this, but their actions don't really back it up.
That's right. That's right.
And I'll link that article for everyone, because you do share. It's not you just going on a rant, by the way, for everyone listening. You do,
which I can easily do for a long time.
You do share 6 things in which I found really helpful that people can do, that managers can do. And the first was own it. If you're recruiting, it's important. Stop treating it like it's I like the way you say a side hustle. That's a great way of putting it. I have some of the examples you have in there of like, and I'm guilty of this too, by the way. Like I think we all are. For example, we talk about stop canceling interviews because there's a critical meeting that's come up. When I read that, I kind of had a flashback to me doing that, and I was like, oh, right. So we're all guilty in some respects. No one's perfect. Yeah. Do you want to share some of the others? Or the other 6?
I haven't looked at that article in a few weeks. So
I'll go through them and you can add on.
Prompt me.
Yeah, no, so I read it again today because it's super. You also said write a brief for your recruiter.
This is a good one. Yeah, this is a good one. So many years ago when I was in the advertising industry, we were trying to this goes back to asking why, right? The power of asking why. Why is it so hard to hire underrepresented talent? We were asking ourselves these questions. Why? What is getting in the way? And I mentioned earlier the subjective way that we look at resumes and the subjective way, if you're hiring creatives, that we look at portfolios. This was a huge part of what was getting in the way. And so by writing an actual brief, and if you've been in the creative field or in marketing, advertising, many fields use these, right? You write a brief that says, this is what we're trying to accomplish with this project. So let's just take it out of recruiting for a moment and just say it's just a project. When I bring a project team together, I have to brief that team on what we're doing. That brief needs to inspire them. It needs to be specific. It needs to be clear so that everybody on the team knows what we're trying to accomplish. The job description to me is this is the work that needs to get done. A recruiting brief is this is the person we're looking for to do it. It's different. So that brief actually guides us on what are the required skills, expertise, and attributes that are needed to do the work that's in the job description. Once you start to lay that out and you actually really get into the specifics, and we actually train managers to get really, I mentioned earlier that we really strive for deep insights about the work that's going to need to get done. So I'm going to use a quick example. Most companies, a lot of companies anyway, will say that, we're really collaborative, right? Everybody says, oh, we're
it's
a
like
collaborative.
A generic one, right?
Yeah. It's really generic. We're really collaborative. Are you collaborative? Sure, I'm collaborative. When you talk about things like that, like collaborative is actually one of our cultural attributes, and it's inherent. It's intended to be generic because we want teams to figure out what collaboration means to them. There isn't one type of collaboration that gets used across all of EA that's like a cookie cutter. TA is different than marketing, is different than a game design team. So what I asked them to do is I said, think about somebody that you would describe as collaborative, that you work with right now. Just think about that person. What actions do they take that make you say that about them? You might say, for example, that, well, I think Anne is really collaborative because she seeks out the opinions of others, even when she knows that people might disagree with her. Oh, that's cool. Guess what? That's an interview question. You can put that on the brief. You can say, demonstrates the ability to seek out the opinions of others, even when they differ. And that can be on your brief.
Yeah.
And now you just flip that around. Tell me about a time when you blah, 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 blah. And now you understand. Now you're taking it into actions, the actual work, the verbs. I tell people all the time, use verbs, use verbs, use verbs. What is the action? Otherwise, we end up in this like ethereal place of like, oh, we're a very collaborative culture. Can you tell me about a time when you worked on a team that was highly collaborative and how did that work for you?
Generic.
Super vanilla,
Yeah.
really generic, you know? So the brief helps guide the questions. It actually, if you go through those steps, you write the job description about the work that needs to get done. You write the brief about the person you're looking for to do the work. Then you brief your interview team on with your brief. You put your brief there in front of your recruiter, in front of your interview team. Now you've got everybody aligned. Everybody knows what you're doing. And the entire process sort of sorts itself from there.
But back to what we said before, like even listening to that, I don't even have that set of skills and I'm a CEO of the business. Like I've never sat down and approached it. I'll be honest, the way that you're talking about it. And that's why it ends up. And you mentioned earlier, and I was really embarrassed when you said it, of, you just take a previous example of one you've made before and you make some edits. That's what I do. And that's what most people do. It's really bad.
Everybody does it. Everyone does it.
But that's all we know. Like it's not because I want, it's just what I know. It's how I was. Actually, I wasn't even showing how to do that, to be honest. I just did it that way, like many people. And that's why we end up seeing these crazy job descriptions on LinkedIn. And I'm seeing so many companies now on LinkedIn being called out for their job descriptions because
they're terrible. They're terrible. They're really terrible. And it's really, there's a whole world in which, I think that whole thing needs to be reimagined. The idea of a resume. If you think about resumes and job descriptions, it's sort of interesting. These are the two pieces of currency, right? To get a job. You have a resume. I have a job description. You write your resume to try to sell me on you. You can write whatever the hell you want in there. That is a hugely
That's what's crazy about it. Yeah.
It's an ad. It's an ad for someone. They're selling themselves to you. It's a piece of advertising. Then I write a job description, and maybe my job description is either one that I used 5 years ago and I make a few changes to it, or it's one I pulled off the internet and I slapped my company's logo on, That's also and now yeah. these two very flawed documents are now getting matched up together to see if there's a fit.
On that point,
unbelievable.
On that point, and I know this is going to be a fun one. You said if there's one thing you should stop doing, stop interviewing people for culture fit. And the amount of people I speak to that always talk about, we interview for culture fit, and it's like something they brag about and talk about. Why do you say that?
Well, the first problem is the word fit. So go back to what I said earlier, that I had this advertising executive I worked with who was like, no, we got a thing. It's our secret sauce. It's our fit. It's the people to him, fit was the people he could go out and have a beer with after work. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't drink, so I'm not going to fit now, right? Like that's just one simple thing. Like fit is a problem in and of itself. So if anything, you should be looking at what is my culture, who's currently here and what skills, expertise, and backgrounds do they bring? And how do I bring somebody that's going to add to that? Not fit in with that. Fit in just means assimilation, sameness. So that's the first thing. I think the idea of fit is something that even just changing the word and not using the word sort of starts to help reframe your perspective in your head. So that's number one. So we talk about it as culture add. Who can we add that's going to bring something new to the table? So every time you have a role open, take a look at your team, assess what you've got, look at the leveling, look at their backgrounds and experience, and think about what am I missing? And then put that in your brief. And when you put that in your brief, don't let your gut be the thing that tells you whether or not you found it. Interview for it. What are the things that make your culture? So we talked about collaboration earlier. We have a list of cultural attributes at EA. And collaboration is one of them. There's all sorts of other things in there like change agent and creativity and analytical. We take those things and we make a subset of them for the role. And we put those things on the brief. And then we interview for them. We interview them as diligently with actual behavioral questions, situational questions, with specific types of questions about the actual actions people take that support our culture. So we interview for those cultural attributes just as if they're your skills or your expertise or your knowledge. And we get evidence of whether or not you act in a way that will add to our culture. Rather than, I'm going to just and I used to do this in my career too. So again, what you said earlier, we all do various things that I'm saying. And that's why we're all human. And if we all take a look in the mirror, we'll be better off for it. But, I'm going to go take this person for lunch just because I want to feel them out. And it's not an interview. We're just going to chat. That's dangerous because it allows Linda's social and cultural upbringing to come into play in ways that aren't related to the job.
Because you're like bond over certain
You're
things.
just bonding over, I don't know, maybe they say they like hockey.
Yeah.
And now this is my new best friend and my most esteemed employee because of hockey. It happens. Somebody walks in the room and tells me they're from Chicago. And then and I say, oh, I'm from Chicago. Where are you from? They're like, oh, I'm from 79th and Pulaski. I'm like, ooh, dude, South Side, high five. Suddenly, I may not interview this person as diligently as I would interview somebody who told me they were from New York, because I don't know that much about New York. We do it in our brains are wired to look for those things.
It's a good thing as well. Obviously, it's a good thing, but not in that situation.
Exactly. So yeah, because all of those things, our brains are wired to look for that familiarity because of safety reasons, right? They want to find, am I safe? Am I in a comfortable situation? That's what your brain is doing behind the scenes. And so somebody could walk in and have, a certain sports team's hat on, and think about this, right? With football, right? If somebody walked in and they had like a patch on their backpack and it was Man City and you're a Man U fan, you could seriously almost be in a fist fight in this interview, right?
So
are you going to hire that person? Are you going to hire someone like that? So yeah, we have all sorts of biases that come into play in those moments.
And again, that's one of your 6 things that you mentioned in the article is learn how to interview. You can't wing it. And I think that's where it's great to have a process in place where that kind of having a process actually on its own kind of removes some of that bias because you're following it specifically.
That's the entire point. Like having a consistent process, using the process, trusting the process, doing the work, do the work. And, there was a creative director at Apple, actually. We did a round of this training before we were hiring a bunch of apprentices to come in. So we were starting in a creative apprenticeship program. And so our managers had to interview people that had literally 0 to maybe 1 year of work experience and probably not even similar work experience. I mean, one of the guys was like the assistant manager at an ice cream shop. So, it wasn't like you could say, like, tell me about a time when you had to put some advertising work out,
Yeah.
So we had to teach them how to interview for potential. We had to teach them, how to interview for relatable skills, not the exact skill, but something that could be relatable. And I had a manager he'd been a manager probably about 10 years at least. And he stopped me before he went into one of his interviews, into the interview room. And he said, I finally know what I'm doing. Because he'd gone through the training. I finally know what I'm doing. So and in that moment, you're just like, he was so grateful. He had notes from the training on a clipboard so that he could get it right when he went in the room.
I know how he feels. Everyone listening right now, and we all know how that feels when you first, 10 years, I went years and years of that. I kind of was a great salesperson. You're a great salesperson. So obviously now you're going to be a great manager, Chris. Now you're a manager. And I remember going to my first meeting saying, what am I doing? I remember Googling what questions to ask in interview. And I was like, Harvard Business Review, top questions to ask. Right. And I had them written down on a notepad. Not even, that was my approach.
Yeah. Well, and look, again, we've all been there. This is one of the things that I always joke about at the beginning of the training, just to kind of break the ice with everyone. Like, who's done it? Okay, come on, raise your hand. Who's done it? We've all done it. And what's wrong with that is that those questions are generic. They're not specific. They're not specific to the work you need done, because I assume your work is specific to your company and your company's needs and not whatever Harvard Business Review needed. There's a need sometimes, and I can see why people do Google those things. And as long as they're adapting them to their job, it's not a horrible thing to do. But you don't know how old they are. You don't know who wrote them. I saw recently somebody posted a whole list of a bunch of questions you should ask advertising and marketing people. And there were like 4 or 5 of them that were yes or no questions. And I just thought to myself, like, that's
oh my God,
a horrible practice. Like, you can't ask it.
Oh, you didn't even ask an open question. Oh my God, that's horrible.
Yeah. They're yes or no. Like, okay.
Did you comment? I would have had to comment it on that post. I would have been able to help myself. I'm like, you can't ask a closed question. What are you doing?
So there's a lot of shit out on the internet, basically. So if you're Googling stuff on the internet, you're probably getting crap back. And you'd be better off learning how to build a question, because it's actually not that hard.
Yeah, it's a great skill as well to develop.
It's a great skill because it helps you not only with interviewing, it helps you with your employees. It helps you as a manager.
Everything.
That appreciative inquiry that you have to do in an interview is going to help you be better at your job no matter what.
I start doing it in everyday encounters because I do this show for a living where literally I'm spending 99% of my time asking open questions. Whenever we go, I meet a new, my wife and I went for a dinner with some of her friends recently, and she's like, They were like, Chris, you just keep asking us so many open questions. Like,
Interviewing people.
I don't mean it. I'm just genuinely like, why is that? What does that mean? Like, why did you make that decision? Oh, well, and they're like, I don't even know. They've not even asked themselves that question before. They're like, oh, why did I do that? So it's
you mentioned this at the beginning, actually, about like when you were interviewing for your job and you were asking the recruiter why do you need to have a degree? It is the most powerful question we can ask ourselves. And oftentimes the answers we've never really thought about, we'll ask managers sometimes, they'll come to us with an interview schedule and they've got, 15 people on it. And it's too many people. Why do you have this many people? Well, it's just the way we've always done it. We always include the whole team. Okay, well, let's talk about why that, what's wrong with that practice. And does everyone, let's pull that apart. Now, maybe there's still a good reason. And maybe at the end of the day, we all go, actually, this makes sense. But we're not asking ourselves why enough in the recruiting process. We've just got a lot of legacy that just keeps getting passed down and passed down and passed down and passed down. This is just how we do it. And everyone's interview process, by the way, if I laid out my interview process and I flash it up on the screen right now for you and all the listeners, most people will go, oh yeah, that looks familiar. We haven't really disrupted this process. It's been around for, 100 years or so. I just think there's a lot to think about and a lot of work that hasn't been done yet in this space.
Yeah. How do you hold yourself and your hiring managers accountable? You do this training, you get over 1,000 people that have gone through it, but people are people and they kind of veer off in a different direction. How do you hold people accountable?
Yeah. Well, what we really try to do is drive the accountability into their management structure. So my boss said to me, he actually said this to me, I don't know, it was like 3 or 4 months ago, and it stuck with me because I was frustrated with something. I can't even remember what. And he said to me, Linda, if this is a talent acquisition process, it'll fail. If it's TA saying, I'm going to hold you guys accountable for this, all you guys and girls accountable for this, it won't work. It has to be their manager. So the accountability has to be driven from the business. So what we try to do is get that leadership level first. So for example, in the marketing organization, before I did the training, I sat down with my CMO, Chris Bruzzo, and said, I need you to go to training because you have to demonstrate good behavior. But before I could even get him to say yes to that, I had to explain to him, hey, you want to hire more diverse talent, right? Absolutely. Okay. Let's go on this journey together. I had to bring him along, explain what we thought we could do together, explain what I thought the benefits were going to be to him and his team. And he was on board. So he wrote the email to everyone saying, hey, this training's coming. You're going to hear from Linda. I need you to go. I'm going to go. I'll see you there. And then after the training, he said, what's the one thing that I can hold everyone accountable for? What's one thing that out of all the training that we can put a stake in the ground on? And it was the brief. So he said, everyone's doing the brief and you can't open a rec until you do it. And you have to present it to me. So he sat for a year.
Ooh, that's in a
room.
and it's better because it's not coming from you as well. Yeah.
Now they're listening, right? So, and if you think about what I said in the article and what, and when I say you have to own it, this is owning it. This is the most senior person in the organization saying, we're doing it. By the way, I'm doing it. I'm going to training. I'm going to learn. I'm going to unlearn my bad behavior. You guys are too. I'm going to sit in the room and listen to each and every one of your briefs. And he did for over a year. And he would be in the room. The VP of HR for that group was in the room. Myself or one of my recruiters was in the room. And the other hiring managers that had to present roles were in the room so they could learn from each other. Oh. And he would ask tough questions. He would ask hard questions. And we would uncover like weird stuff, like legacy stuff. Like I was telling you earlier, I remember a manager presenting a job and saying, we asked, how do you feel about like our ability to find a diverse pool of candidates for you? And they said, well, I think it's going to be tough because we can only look in the Bay Area. And I said, well, why is that? Oh, we don't have money for relocation. Really? And the finance team was in the room. So I was like, hey, finance, is that true? And they're like, no, where'd you hear that? You're like, well, somebody else told me that we don't relocate people below a certain grade level.
Once upon a time, and now
it wasn't even true.
Imagine how many of those misconceptions exist in our
and so in the recruiting process, normally the way we work is like one-on-one conversations, right? A manager talks to a recruiter A recruiter talks to a candidate. The candidate talks to the manager again. Then they go into a series of one-on-one interviews. Then we make a decision about them. We're never really getting together as a group and going, what are we doing? How are we thinking about this? What are we looking for? The power of those conversations is incalculable. Those moments where we all just sit and we come together in a vulnerable way and talk about what we're doing and what we're building. And different managers saying, well, do you really need that skill? Because we have a bunch of people on my team that have that skill. So maybe there's a way that you could actually get something different that they would have these conversations in the room, and they still do it today. And this model has become a model for other groups at EA. So we're starting to roll this model out across the company now, because the success of that was that we increased underrepresented hiring in that year that Chris put this in place, anywhere between 12 and 20%, depending on what quarter you look at. The highest quarter was 20%, the lowest quarter was 12%. We saw immediate results from the training and then the brief. Mm-hmm. So I know it works.
Well, I love that, because normally I ask people how they hold people accountable. They're like, there's not much of a response, but that was very clear and coming from the top. And again, it's not you and the team, it's the leaders within each of those organizations that are setting the expectations. And more importantly, they're walking the walk themselves. Right. And again, there's no right or wrong answers. And I feel like you created that safety as well, where we're doing this together, right? It isn't like you're on your own, you're expected to get a perfect Chris, and you're going to write this amazing brief first time round, because that's not the point of it. And I'm sure now it's almost becoming part of the culture, and it's just the way you operate and the way this is how you do things at EA Sports now.
It is. It definitely is. I think it's funny. It's interesting because people start to get used to it. Then people start to get used to what questions Chris is going to ask them. Then they start to anticipate that stuff. And they're kind of like learning in advance of like even going to him, because they're like, what's Chris or Linda or Hugh going to ask me? Yeah. So it's definitely interesting. It's also a journey, and the way the brief was written originally doesn't serve us anymore already. So it's one of those things where our thinking, our education, the journey that everyone else is on, we have to keep going. We're never going to be done. In Chris's org, for example, we looked at our numbers. They're doing a fantastic job in that group. And so in order for them to do more, which they want to do more, we want to push ourselves harder. We got that far. Let's go further. We have to make bigger interventions now. So that's why we're starting to look at, like, how do you look at a resume? What's the point of entry for a candidate? Let's go and look at that moment, because that moment matters. And how do we redesign that and give people tools and training to make sure that we're as inclusive as possible in that moment? It's fun that EA lets us dig into this stuff, like that they've really been so open and so supportive. I mean, I get resources, I get people, they're really committed to this, and they're allowing us to prototype and try things and then go, that worked, or no, that didn't. Let's toss that, keep that, move on. So it's been a pretty amazing experience, and it's given me this opportunity, I think, and I get so passionate about this, as you can tell. It's given me this opportunity to be able to go, like, tell people like you and everybody else listening, like, if you train people and if you put a brief in place, I promise it works. It works. I'm seeing it. It works.
Yeah, I love it. And on the CV point as well, like, every CV is completely different, because there's no like everyone has their own type of CV and the way to write it, the way it's structured. One pager, some people got 4 pages. It's like it's a minefield, absolute minefield. I wouldn't even know how to write one now. I haven't applied for a job in 15, 16 years. I wouldn't even know where to start as well. And it's well, look, amazing work the Unit team do. I know you've just begun, and I can already feel everyone listening. I'm sure could feel the passion.
I get a little excited.
It's great to hear you. I feel like, given your story, your background and journey, you're definitely in the right role. And I think something that I'm seeing that's playing out, just given our short time together, is your experience in advertising and marketing. You're also putting a great building a brand around it, and the excitement and marketing and selling it internally, which is super important. And so I see so many projects fall flat because they don't have that element, where it's kind of really part of your skills.
When you start to think about, like, understanding in marketing, understanding who you're talking to and understanding, what's going to influence them and marketing's all about changing people's behavior, influencing them to change behavior and take an action that you want them to take. So yeah, we have to do some, the training, just because I have training and I say I have training doesn't mean everybody wants to do it. In fact, when people hear training, they usually go, oh, So I need to have a brand for the training that makes people go, oh, that training? I heard that training's cool. I heard that training's really helpful. I want that training. So we want people beating down our door to say, can you please train me? Mm-hmm. Which we have right now. In fact, we're in the process of doing this 2.0 training. So we're on a pause from actually delivering the current training, because it's really hard to deliver the current stuff when you already know you want to change it. But we're going to have to do I'm speeding up the timeline for 2.0 because I've got 3 big teams that are like, we want to be trained in January.
I want to get involved. I want to be part of the train. I've got a lot. I've got a lot to learn. I've learned a lot about myself on this call. So I think there's a lot of people listening. If you're listening right now, leave a comment if you feel like you need to.
Yeah, right.
As well. But listen, I'm conscious of time, and I want to let you go to have your weekend. But it's really been a pleasure talking with you, and super excited for
so much
what you're doing with the team. If there's one thing that you want people to take away from this, what would that be? I know we've covered quite a lot. And then where can people connect with you if they want to reach out and say hello? Yeah,
so reach out, say hello on LinkedIn. That's where, I keep my business profile. I don't really do Twitter or other things like that. But you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think the one takeaway is if you're a hiring manager, you got to own it and make it part of your day job. It really has to be a part of how you perceive your performance in your job. There's no more critical decision you make as a manager. So own it and bring in your partners to consult, but own it.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. For everyone listening, if you enjoyed the episode, please like, comment, share, tag in your managers.
Yeah, tag your hiring managers.
Tag in your hiring managers. That's the one call to action on this. Also, if you want to connect with Linda, click on the link below. There'll be a link to a LinkedIn profile will be there right now. Yeah. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day, Linda, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Take care, Chris.
Bye.
Bye-bye.